Hey, what's up guys? Chip Walters here today, and I want to share with you a new NITROX3D video on how to create a radial symmetrical object. Not only are we going to figure out how to create one, but we're also going to create one that is very easily editable. So before we get started, let me mention there are over 20 tutorials available in the NITROX3D non-destructive modeling course, and you can find this course on both Blender Market and Gumroad. Furthermore, as I continue to add tutorials to the course, you get the free updates. That said, every time I add new materials, typically the price goes up just a little bit, so you're best off if you get in early. Okay, on with the tutorial. So to do that, let's go ahead and get started. First, I'm going to start off by inserting a plane. I'll tab into edit mode, and I'll hit Alt-M and merge at center. And now I have one vertex there. I'll hit the 1 key, so now I'm in vertex mode. And I'm going to hit the E for extrude and Z to go straight up. And I can go any dimension. We'll just go like something like that. That'll be fine. So now that we have that done, I'll tab out of that, and I have this vertical straight line, as you can see. We are going to add a modifier. And the modifier that we're going to add is going to be the screw modifier. You would think using the screw modifier would make a lot of sense in that we're creating something radial symmetrical, but actually in this case we're just going to create something on a linear path. Choose the axis as X, the screw distance is 1, and steps are 16. I'm going to leave that alone. This is the object that we want. Hold Q, I'll turn on my wireframes here. Now the question I'll need to ask right off the bat is, how many elements do I want this radial symmetry to have? So for instance, if I have 4, then each one will be 90 degrees. If I have 3, they'll be 120 degrees. 2, they'll be 180 degrees. So you understand that however many elements that you want to be symmetrical about, you're going to want to be able to take that number and divide by 360. Right now, let's go ahead and we're going to create a 3-element symmetry. So after I create this screw modifier, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a solidify modifier. In here, I'm going to create the offset 0. I will make the thickness anything I want. Let's just start something like this. And you notice that we're already getting some artifact shading. So we can go in here and just say auto smooth, and that's going to give us what we want. Now that we have this done, we're going to want to create 2 more elements. One is going to be a Bezier circle, Shift A, curve, circle, and the next is an empty, Shift A, empty. I'll use a plane axis for that. So I'm going to take this object right here and go back into my modifiers, and I'm going to add a curve modifier to it, and I will select the curve, and you can see now we're all set. And I can adjust these if I need. If we use the X axis, it will come up correctly with the right deformation axis. The next thing I want to do is I'm going to add an array modifier. I'll come into the array, I will turn off relative offset, and we said we're going to have 3, and they're going to be 120 degrees. And so what I'll do is I will turn on the object offset, and I'll select that empty. So let's go ahead and select the empty, and we'll go to our rotation, and I'm going to rotate that 120 degrees. And there we have it. Now, we're not quite there yet. As you can see, we have these big gaps in here. And the way we're going to fix that, we're going to go back into our modifiers, and I'm going to click merge and first and last, and then I'll go back into screw, and this number up here, the distance, I'm going to hold the shift key down and I'm going to drag to the right just until it actually snaps closed, and you'll see it does that right there. Hey, just a quick mention at the end of this presentation, I'm going to show you a shortcut that basically bypasses all this stuff and gets you into editing these radial symmetrical objects extremely quickly. So stay tuned. Now if I zoom up on it, you'll see that that's perfect and we're in good shape. Now if I want to adjust the number of segments, that's simple. I just do that right here with this number. So let's make it 48. 48 for rendering also. And this can be merge vertices too, but we really don't have any vertices that we're going to need to merge on this. Now I'm going to tab into this, and I am going to click right here so that it stays there. So you can see there's the line right here. And I'm going to take that vertex at the very top, and I'm going to extrude it in the Y dimension, and then I'm going to raise it up. So I'm going to get this kind of a surface right here. And then I'm going to take this vertex in the middle, and I'm going to give it a bevel weight of 0.5. And then I'm going to tab out of this, and then I'll go into my modifiers for this. I'm going to add one more modifier, and that's a bevel. I'm going to move that bevel to the top. So I'll click here once, and then I'll hit Shift R, and just keep hitting Shift R until it goes all the way to the top. And now it's there. Now I will set be only vertices, and to use the weight factor, and we will add a number of segments. Let's do 6 is fine. So you'll see that it looks pretty good, except we've got some really weird geometry here. And the reason for that is that many times in the screw modifier, we'll have to come back and say calculate the order. And once we've done that, we'll get there. So this is really step 1 in this process. Let's see how easy it is now to edit this. So first I'm going to go ahead and turn perspective off by hitting the 5 on the numpad keyboard. Next I'm going to go into the modifiers for the object, and I'm going to turn off the curve, and I'm going to turn off the array. And so I just have this surface right here. And I'll hold the Alt key down while I'm rotating and get it so that it's a perfect back orthographic projection. And with that done, I'll deselect it, and I'll say Shift A, and I'm going to add a plane, and then I'll tab into the plane, and with all the vertices selected, I'll Alt M, merge at center, and noticing that we're in the vertex mode, I will hit the G key, which will move it around. So I'm going to move this around, let's say right to there. And now I'm going to go to the side, and you'll see it's right in the center here, and I want to move it out in front of this so that when we're working on it, we'll be able to see it clearly. So now that it's there, I'll just extrude myself a quick box, and that's easily done by saying E for extrude, X for direction, hit the 2 key to select the edge, E for extrude, Z for direction, and there's our box. Next thing I'll do is I'll select everything, and I'm just going to move this somewhere in the middle. It doesn't really matter for now. Remember, we're editing now just 1/3 of this radial symmetrical object. Tab out of it to be in object mode, and now we'll go into our modifiers, and I'm going to add a solidify modifier. And as I add thickness, I'm going to change the direction, and I want to make sure that it'll go all the way through both sides, which it does quite nicely. Next, I'll come over here to our original object, and I'm going to add a Boolean modifier, and I will select this box here, and it's cut a hole, but the box is still being visible. So in order for me to hide the box, I'll select it, go over to the object properties, and go to viewport display, and we'll go into display as wire. Now the problem is we're still going to render it, so up here in plane we're going to turn this off. So now we know that we're not going to render that when we do a rendering. So let's go back into our orthographic view, and I'm going to tab into this, and you can see I can say G to move it around. I can just select different parts and I can edit it. And now I'll say A, Shift D, move this over here, let's scale it, S to scale, maybe something like this. Now one of the things I want to do while I'm doing this is I'm going to want to make sure that I'm not hotlining against any one of these existing edges. And so to do that, we can zoom all the way in, and we can see that you know, we're not hitting any edges. This one we might be close, so I can come over here and move that in and out. If I want to select the whole object while I have an edge or a vertex selected, I can just hit the L key, and it'll get the whole object for me. So I'll move that up to here, let's say. So let's just leave it like that for right now. Notice that we've cut through completely both parts of the object. And I'm going to go ahead and tab back into object mode, select this, go into the modifiers, and let's just turn these back on. So now we're going to see that it really doesn't do much. Why is that? Well, that's because this Boolean is at the very end of the chain. So let's go ahead and take this Boolean and let's move it up. And we're going to move it up right after solidify, and once we do, we see that we have just cut out 6 different holes in our object. So let's talk about a couple other things. As we look at our model, you'll notice that if we go into the solidify, we can adjust the thickness right here. But when we do, if we get too far, we're going to get this crossover vertice problem, and when that happens, we're going to need to back off the thickness. We'll back up the thickness to something like that. The other problem that we're having is we're getting an issue with an overlap here. Now why is that? So let's take a look at our settings for our array. We have merge first and merge last. Merge is the points up here, but there is no point for it to merge here. Let me show you what I'm talking about. If I go into this screw and I adjust this, you'll see that as it comes closer and closer, it'll snap at the top, but it's not going to snap down at the bottom. The best way to handle this is to go back. Let's toggle the modifiers off. Let's turn off array and curve. We will take this object now, and we're going to move it So again, we don't have any hot lines, so it's not lining up directly with anything. And once we've done this, we can tab out, select this object, turn these back on, and now you see that we no longer have those anomalies. But we do have another problem here. And as we look, you'll see that there's a facet, even though we have this screw set to 48. In fact, let's go ahead and push it up even higher. Let's push it up to something really high. Notice we still have this faceting going on. Now, what is that driven from? Well, that's part of our curve. So if we go and we select our curve, now the curve is selected, and let's edit the curve and this resolution preview. Now watch, as I make this go down, it's going to get straighter and straighter, fewer and fewer points on that curve. But if we move it all the way up to say something like 64, which is the maximum it can be, we're going to be good. And that maximum really doesn't affect anything because the curve is being used as a template. So 64 is a good number for that. Now let's go back in to our object and let's reset those steps to 48, and now we're good. Let's go into a quick mocap. One more thing we want to talk about here, and that's going to be some other shading artifacts that we may see. So let's turn the wireframe off and let's turn the overlays off. So as we look at this, you're going to see that we have a lot of shading artifacts. We have all these little ridges going along around here. And why is that? Well, again, if you remember, our original object was nothing more than a couple lines, 3 points and 2 lines. In fact, I can just tab into here and hit the viewport viz, and you'll see that we have just these 2 lines are the only thing that's being shown. The blue one is highlighted because it's already set as a sharp. So I go into our edge, I can say clear sharp, and that's gone. And I select all of these. Now let's go back in and let's go ahead and toggle these back on here. We'll see that once I've turned off that sharp, we have a very nice smooth surface. But we do have one other problem. That's this line right here. And that line is a function of these interiors. So we remember when we turned off our array and curve modifiers, we have an object that actually has ends on it. And so when you match those ends up, we're going to get that line. So how do we fix that? Well, there's a couple things we can do. One is I can take this solidify and I can move it down beyond the array. And now it works fine. But the problem with that is that now I can't do additions on here. I can only cut holes into it. So I'm going to move that back to where it was. This means eventually I'm going to have to convert this to a mesh to fix that particular problem. And we're going to talk about how to do that a little bit later. So let's first do a little house cleaning. I'm going to rename these objects. I can go up here, and this one I'm going to just call this the master object. This empty is going to be the master rotate empty. And this Bezier circle is going to be master Bezier circle. And this particular plane looks like it's nothing, so I'll delete that. This plane I'm going to call master diff. Here's another object we had that we couldn't delete. So now we have our stuff collection cleaned up, and all of our objects are named so we can better understand them. So the next thing I want to do is I'm going to create an addition boolean to this. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to take this master diff and I'm going to shift D and right click to leave it where it is, and I'm going to name this one master union. And then I'll go back into our object and I'll turn off our curve and our array, and I will go to our master union object. I'm going to go into edit mode, X, and I'll delete those vertices, and I'll grab these. I'm going to move this down, and as you can see, we have this poking all the way through. So I'm going to actually move this out, and then I'm going to go ahead and do something kind of cool. I'm going to hit the 2 button to go in edge mode, grab this, and now you can see it. Now I'm going to move this in. So now I'm tilting it. So I've got a union that's going to be tilted right down like that. So leave it like that. And then let's go back into our object here, and I'm going to take this boolean, I'm going to copy it. I will make this object the master union. Instead of difference, we're going to make it a union. So there it is. So you can see how that works. Once we're done here, we'll go ahead and we'll viewport viz them all together. So there's our object. I'm going to add a bevel on the end of this, and I'm going to make the limit method to be angle, and it's going to put a little tiny bevel, and you can see this little bevel that it puts around everything. And if I show overlays off and turn our mocap off, let's go back into studio mode, and we can see that ridge showing up there. We'll work on that in a second, but you see how nice that bevel handles everything. Now if I go to our lighting mode, you'll see that that bevel adds a lot to this particular object. Now one of the interesting things about that bevel that's worth noting is, let's go back in and let's turn off our objects again, and let's go in here. We'll see that we have these bevels are getting very close, and this one has actually gone over. So we're hotlining on that, and that is fixable by just coming into this bevel width and just dragging it down, something like this. So what's kind of cool is that while I'm in this view, I can go into our union, and with it selected, tab into it, select everything here, and I can just expand it. And as I expand, notice as I get closer, I'm going to lose my bevels, as you can tell as I'm moving around. So I want to make sure I stay in a non-hotline area, which is important. Now that's done, and we'll just go back into our object and turn everything on. You can see that's what our object looks like at this time. Now the one other thing that we're going to have to focus on, and that is this little line down here. If you use different textures, you probably won't even mess with that. But if you really want to fix that, let me show you how you do that. Before we fix that, let's show a cool workflow that this enables. So I'll turn back overlays on, and I'm going to go into our master difference object after turning off the array and the curve. We'll select the master difference and we'll tab into it. And what's really cool about this is that, you can select something and Shift D and, move it, and then Shift R, basically get a few more like that in there. Tab out of that. Let's go into our master union object. Tab into that. Let's say we want to add another object. Let's straighten this one out. That's easy enough done by just scaling this. Zeroing it out on the Y. We can go into the thickness and make it thinner and then drag it so it's just going to intersect right like that. And as I've done that, I hit the Shift D to duplicate, move it around, scale it however I want to. And as I'm moving it around, you're noticing that the actual bevels are shrinking and expanding as we talked about before. So this is going to give me a live preview of whether or not I can bevel the resulting finished object. So that's kind of a cool thing as well. So I'll put that here. Let's thin it up a little bit and move it here. Shift Z, Shift. Add those like that. Let's take this one and let's kind of center it on these like so. Tab out of here. Let's turn these back on. Go into our rendered view, and you can see how neat that object looks and how fast that was to create. We were able to generate something very quickly. Now notice here we have a little bit of an issue where we're actually going in and out of the object there, and that's because of our extrusion depth. So let's go back into our master union and let's just extrude it on the, we'll use the offset a little bit here. There we go. So there. Now this is all straight. You're saying, well, how come that isn't curved? And I'll show you why that's not curved. We'll go back into our object. The master union is selected. Let's tab into it. I'm going to delete everyone, but let's delete all those. And with our polygon selected, we can hit Control R and then use the middle mouse wheel. And once we get something that we know looks pretty good and is not hotlining, we can right click and be done with it. So let's do that, and then let's grab this one, and same thing, Control R. That looks pretty good right there. And now we'll just select this, and we say Shift D to duplicate, Z to drop it down, and then Shift R to repeat, repeat, repeat. Now we're done with that. Tab out. And you'll now see that all of our objects now are rotating along the surface. Now, notice they're faceted. Well, what's up with that? Well, that's because our master union object right here needs to be smooth. So we can select it like we have right there, right click on it and say shade smooth, and now that looks good. Let's go to our master difference and do the exact same thing, shade smooth. So lastly, we have this line right here to get rid of. So what we want to do is we're trying to get rid of this sharp line that shows up right here, and you can barely see it. It's not that big of a deal, but you can start to see it as we zoom in. You see it right across there. You can kind of see it as we move down. So that's the line that we're going to get rid of, and it's created by an interior face that's created there. So if I go in here and look at this, and you can see that we have this face, these faces right in here. They're really easy to get rid of, but unfortunately we have to convert this to a mesh to do that. And to convert to mesh is fairly simple. We'll go over here and we'll just say apply all. Once we've done that, we can tab into this. This is our solid view. If I hit the Alt Z, we're going to get this kind of an X-ray view. And with this X-ray view with nothing selected, I'm going to say select by trait interior faces. Here they are. Set X and we're just going to delete the faces. And then we're going to tab back out, and we'll go into our rendered view, and now it's perfect. So that's the last step in this, and it's really only necessary if you need to use additives. As we mentioned before, if you use subtractive booleans, then you can just move that solidify modifier all the way to the bottom of the modifiers panel. So you may be thinking, wow, this is all pretty difficult, and I've thought the same thing also. And so what I've done is, for the NITROX3D customers, I've gone ahead and I've created something called a Radial Symmetrical K-Pack. And in here, in this K-Pack, we have 2-segment radial, a 3-segment radial, a 4-segment, a 5, a 6, a 7, and an 8. And the 7 I actually used recently for creating the tire and the wheel for the Cybertruck, which I'm doing a special project on right now. So let me show you how these work. They're pretty straightforward. Let's grab the 5 one, and with nothing selected, I'll add the insert. And now with it selected, I'm going to remove the kit-out props because I don't need the kit-out props anymore. So now that I have this set up, I'll hit the 5 button to go into my orthographic view. And what I will do is go to my modifier tab, and I'm going to scroll down, and these two right here, I'm going to turn these off. And then I'll also go up here and I'll turn on wireframes so I can see my wireframe. As you can see, I've got a negative here. Here's the negative, and I have the positive right there. Very easy. Just tab into this, and let's just grab these top vertices. Remember, we ended up adding more loops to this object because we want to allow it to bend with the radial symmetrical object. So we'll move this down something like this. Now we'll select all these, and I'll do Shift D to duplicate and Z to go up, and then Shift R, R, R. So I'll just do a few of those like that. And same thing here. I'm going to come over here. I'll come to my Boolean difference object, tab into it, select these, and let's move these up. And then I'll select all of those, and I'll do Shift D and Z and move it down also. And then maybe we'll move these up like so. And I can hit the L key, which will select just those. Shift D, Z down, and Shift R, R, R. So you get the idea. Tab out of that, we'll go back into our modifiers for this object, and we'll turn these back on. And now we can see that we have a fairly neat object. And of course, these are the interior polygons we talked about earlier. And then all we need to do is apply our modifiers and select the interior faces and delete those, and that'll be fine. So one last thing I'll show you that you can do with this. Let's turn them back on and tab in here, and let's grab this button right there. Now we can't see anything right here, and the reason we can't see anything is because we don't have this screw preview turned on, nor do we have the solidify preview turned on. So once we've done that, I've got that selected. I can actually move it down if I want, or move it up. I can go to the side view and extrude it, you know, up if I want, so I can get something else. I can take that middle one right here and go into my, take this vertex and let's add a little bevel weight to that so we smooth that out. So you get the idea. So we'll tab out of this, and we still have our object. So you kind of get the idea how you can use this to create more objects. Here I'll show you the Cybertruck tire, and as you can see, it is a 7-segment radial symmetrical object, and the wheel is also, or this hubcap is also. As I show you the wireframes for it, you'll see that I've got additive objects running around on this thing, different additive, different subtractive objects, and it works very well. Really happy with the result. So it just gives you one example of how you can use these KitOps radial symmetrical inserts to quickly generate an object. If there are enough requests, I'll go ahead and break this down and let you see it. So that's it for this NITROX3D lesson. This is a free one, as I mentioned before. If you have a chance, wander on over to either Gumroad or Blender Market and pick your own copy up of NITROX3D. There's a lot of good stuff going on, and I'll be continually adding to it as we move forward. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you online.